Um, Hello, everyone. My name is Despina Milaki. For those of you who don't know me, I am the representative at the UN for the International Presentation Association, a network of Catholic religious congregations and friends who work in 24 countries worldwide and act in partnership with others for global justice. I'm part of the lead organizing team that collaborated to host this webinar today. A team that is comprised of two other representatives of NGOs, Roja and Dominic from Fondazione Proclade Internazionale, and Marvi Misolas from the Marinol Sisters. In this capacity and on behalf of the 14 faith-based organizations that sponsor the present webinar, I'm extremely pleased to welcome you all here today to our event, Faith Speaks to UN75. As the title indicates, this webinar is taking place on the occasion of the UN 75th anniversary of the founding of the organization. And incidentally, though, this anniversary happens at a time of great disruption in the world as the COVID-19 pandemic with its social and economic impacts demonstrate. And it definitely creates increased challenges for the UN and for all of us, that's for sure. In today's gathering, we will hear about the role of the faith-based organizations in the UN future, as well as how faith-based organizations themselves envision the future of the UN. In this regard, we have the tremendous privilege of being joined today by 8 distinguished speakers that will share with us their thoughts and wisdom on this topic. I thank you all to generously offer your insights to our discussion today. Unfortunately, the time we have at our disposal does not allow me to properly introduce them, each one of them, as I would like to, by presenting important elements from their professional background and respective positions that they have been at. But for all of you, who I'm sure that are interested in learning more about our speakers, please feel free to take a look at the brief bio section that we have attached to the webinar's flyer and program. I will have to ask you, to ask everyone, panelists and attendees, to keep your microphones, please, on mute, so we can optimize our sound quality and experience for everyone gathered. And I would also like to let you know that we are recording this session. A kind reminder of our speakers, I know I have been stressing that a lot to you. It would be greatly appreciated if you respect the designated time of 7 minutes maximum, so that we have everybody has the opportunity, the equal opportunity to present. I would like also to let everyone know that following our speaker's presentation, there will be a Q&A, questions and answers section. And now, without further ado, it is my distinct honor to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Joop Teunissen, the Deputy Chief of the Intergovernmental Policy and Review Branch of the Office of Intergovernmental Support and Coordination for Sustainable Development at the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. We are remarkably happy to have him with us here today. With that, Mr. Teunissen, dear Joop, the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Despina, and thank you all for that. A big word of thanks to the 3 co-organizers and the 14 co-sponsors. I will not mention them by name because it will go against my 7 minutes, and you already spent 1 minute explaining my position in the UN, which is of course a big part of a big beehive. So you have already pinned that down. So all protocol observed, I want to acknowledge and appreciate the willingness and keenness of the other panelists to speak, including His Excellency the Archbishop, who will be speaking next. I will be very brief and I will be very practical. The fact of the matter is that many faith-based organizations share all the common goals of the UN. And I'm not just speaking here of peace and security and safety and international cooperation and human rights, but also in terms of development. And I want to just again acknowledge the large role that was played by many NGOs, including FBOs, in the establishment of the 17 goals that are here behind me, which is basically our vision of the future for the UN. For the UN, I mean the 193 member states and observers, permanent observers that are united in the building and working basically around the clock, around the world, to make sure that the 2030 agenda and its 17 SDGs are being achieved. So that is, of course, a very large task. That is a task that has been challenged in the past and has been challenged even more so this year. As already was mentioned in the introduction, this year we mark the 75th anniversary of the UN. And many of us feel that the birthday party has not yet been held or is being postponed. And I would like to say that we obviously did observe our birthday and we did have a very good input from the many FBOs united together. And basically under a little bit unusual circumstances, to say the least, re-emphasized the need for the UN to fulfill the goals and objectives that it had that were put for it back in 1945 at the end of the Second World War. And that is a very warming thing to observe, that the principles and the objectives of the UN are as valid as ever, even more so. Of course, new challenges have emerged after the establishment of the UN. Many of these 17 goals behind me would look very strange to some of the founding fathers and mothers of the UN back in 1945. I don't think climate change, for example, would be understood very well. But some of the core issues would be very well understood. And that is, of course, the first and foremost objective of the UN in development, and that is to eradicate poverty. And for poverty, we are obviously facing a big setback this year. With many people in this country and basically every country around the world being challenged in being able to feed many people. As a New Yorker, I just want to mention the fact that today's headline includes the fact that 1.5 million New Yorkers are having difficulty getting a good meal. So the relevance of the UN is unabated, and basically just want to emphasize that that this will continue to be so. And just to get a little bit closer to the practicalities of this meeting, and that is about the involvement and participation of faith-based organizations in the work of the UN. Now, as I mentioned in an earlier meeting, the UN is obviously primarily an organization of nations. It's called the United Nations for a reason, and therefore non-governmental organizations, including faith-based organizations, have a more restricted role. Nevertheless, as many of you know, including the International Presentation Association and many of the other orders and organizations that you are part of, do have a consultative status with ECOSOC, which is, of course, the prime vehicle for participating in the work of the UN. Now, very practically, speaking of 2020 and about proximity and not having the possibility to have in-person meetings, the branch that I work in is basically responsible for organizing the HLPF every year, the High-Level Political Forum, which is the body of the UN that reviews the progress of these 17 SDGs behind me here every year in July. And this year we had the opportunity, I wouldn't call it that, but the necessity to organize this event entirely online. What has this implied? We were actually just an hour ago, we were evaluating with some of our colleagues from the regional offices. And someone mentioned that this has led to a democratization of the UN process. We have larger numbers than ever of people taking part online. So that is definitely a plus, and that is also definitely something that we want to take on into the future of the intergovernmental meetings at the UN. Even if we can all meet together and sit within 6 feet of each other, in person in the building. I think one of the positive lessons from this epidemic is that going online is a new way of working and does allow for larger participation and for bigger sharing. Now, someone else in that meeting an hour ago said, yes, it may be wider and broader, but it perhaps may not be as deep as what it used to be. Of course, there's no match for having in-person meetings. That is very clear. Obviously, the HRPF is a marketplace of ideas, for the marketplace for sustainable development, and that is going to be missed. But having said all that, coming out of this crisis, and I'm convinced, absolutely convinced that we will come out of this crisis, perhaps not as fast as everyone would want to, but when we are building back, we will build back better. I'm sure this is a slogan that you've heard many times, but we in the UN are also aiming and looking for ways to build back better in terms of participation of organizations. So I have not checked my clock. It says 10:14. That's, I believe, the time that I need to finish here. But just let me reassure you that we're doing everything we can to make sure that the UN stays a democratic place, as it has been, a place with the doors wide open for all of you to come and participate and share your vision with us. So with that, thank you very much, and I hope I was not going over my time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You were great in following the time restriction. Thank you so much for sharing those very helpful insights. I'm sure many of us agree with your points, and they are very well. They are all very well taken. I would only mention the fact that you have acknowledged that the faith-based organizations share all the common goals of the UN, and even though their role is restricted by default, if I may say, because the United Nations is founded for the nations, however, their engagement and their role can be a great one. And I'm sure nothing beats in-person relationship building, as you mentioned, in any way. And nothing can replace human contact. We know that very well. But we have to adjust to the new reality, the digital one. And from there, taking that, following that point, I would like to again to thank you for your insights. And I would like now to move into introducing our second speaker of today, His Excellency Archbishop Gabriele Giordano Caccia. He's the permanent observer of the Holy See to the United Nations. We are remarkably blessed to have him here with us today. And Your Excellency, the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind invitation. It's my first time. I just arrived not many months ago before the lockdown, but I'm very pleased to meet with you for the first time, even not in person. So dear religious leader, distinguished panelists, dear sisters, ladies and gentlemen, as we approach the 75th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations on October 24th, it is good to get together to examine the contributions of people of faith and faith-based organizations in the past, present, and future of this institution. I would like to thank all the sponsors of this virtual event for their work in organizing it and for their kind invitation. Our world is profoundly religious. 85% of people across the globe profess faith in God and are affiliated with a religion. Of all the factors that can unite the nations of the world, faith is among the strongest, as it brings people into communion at the core of their being, beyond distinctions of citizenship, language, race, and sex. It is unsurprising that the United Nations campus here in New York gave us an unmistakable testimony to the profoundly religious reality of the world. It is impossible to miss the enormous statue of St. George slaying the dragon in the North Lawn, showing the triumph of faith over evil, and insofar as it was made out of destroyed nuclear warheads from the United States and the former Soviet Union, of peace over war. In the garden along the East River, we have a beautiful statue depicting God's summons through the prophet Isaiah to beat swords into plowshares, words indelibly inscribed as well across the 42nd Street entrance. Right off the UN General Assembly lobby, there is the meditation room, personally designed by Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld, inviting people to silence and prayer. Outside the meditation room, there is Chagall's famous peace window, depicting on one side scenes of the goodness of the world as in Eden, and images of peace, the Ten Commandments and the family, but also showing the ancient serpent, scenes of evil, and notably a crucifixion. There is also the Japanese peace bell, taken from a Shinto shrine, a curtain of the Holy Kaaba of Mecca, a mosaic depicting the dove of peace after the flood, and a painting of Calvary right outside the Secretary General's office, and many other examples of religious art. Perhaps the most conspicuous reminder of the importance and influence of religion in the United Nations is found on the third floor of the conference building, where one encounters the striking Golden Rule mosaic based on Norman Rockwell's famous sketch. In the early 1950s, Rockwell wanted to depict the United Nations as the world's hope for the future, but eventually he decided to show a group of 65 people of different religions, races, and ethnicities, young and old, beyond the saying of Jesus, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." This is a testimony not only of the ethical inheritance of the religions of the world at their best, but a witness to the deeply ingrained principles of conscience that are meant to animate the discussions of the United Nations. Rockwell found this common ethical heritage to be the hope for the world's future. All of these religious art, gifts of the nation of the world, are important reminders to ambassadors and delegates, UN staff, NGOs, representatives, and visitors that to be truly representative of the peoples of the world, the UN must always remain inclusive and respectful of religion and of people and organizations of faith. Moreover, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted when the United Nations was in its infancy, proclaims everyone's right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This universal human right brings with it a duty, not just on individuals and states, but also the international community to respect, value, and protect this fundamental freedom. The more this respect is given, and the more people of faith and faith-based organizations are invited to contribute to stronger the United Nations will be, and the better off our world will be. When we look at the four pillars of the United Nations, it is easy to see how central people of faith and faith-based are to the implementation of each. Preventing the scourge of war and the arduous work of peacemaking and peace building are not just accomplished by diplomats and blue helmets, but so by many actors on the ground, helping people to reconcile and building and staffing the institutions that make peace possible. People of faith are on the front lines in schools, pulpits, hospitals, refugee camps, and more, putting into practice faith in fundamental human rights and the equal rights of men and women based on reverence for the dignity of every human person. Believers of faith-based organizations for centuries have been working to lift up the poor out of poverty, to feed the hungry, to protect our planet. In short, to implement what would eventually become the Sustainable Development Agenda, well before the SDGs have ever been formulated. Likewise, religious men and women serve as a conscience for world leaders to establish conditions of justice and to honor the commitments arising from the treaties and international law. Much of the work of faith across organizations is appreciated and warmly embraced by international community, and we are very grateful. The courageous and indefatigable efforts of so many believers working for peace, helping the poor, advancing the rights of women, educating children, tending the sick, rehabilitating and seeking justice for victims, promoting harmony, and caring for our common home are all rightfully praised. The implementation of so many of the priorities of the United Nations would simply never have a chance of being accomplished without the contributions of people on the ground motivated by love of God and of neighbor. These good words flowing from faith need to continue and to grow. But there are a few ways in which faith-based vision is considered a threat by some people, and it's important for us to take note of this. If we fail to do this, it could lead to a situation in which people of faith will not be able to continue to contribute the good of others and the world. I would like to conclude this note reminding that believers give witness to the fact that God exists and call us to relationship, not just with him, but with each other. When we see ourselves as God's children, we cannot help but regard others as our brothers and sisters. In order to become a family of nations with genuine fraternity, the world needs believers living out this basic truth. This is the core message of Pope Francis' recent encyclica, Fratelli Tutti. One of the foremost expressions of human transcendence is prayer. Believers are called not just to work as hard as we do for peace, for human rights, for integral development, for justice. We are likewise called to turn to God, implore these blessings, as Pope Francis did yesterday in Rome together with Patriarch Bartolome and leaders of different religious traditions. Notwithstanding all of the other good we strive to do, prayer is perhaps our most important contribution. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Archbishop Caccia, for your comments and your wisdom. Again, your points are so inspiring for all of us. I will only re-emphasize the excellent point among the others, of course, that you mentioned that faith actually brings people together, regardless the color, the race, the sex, the language, or the socioeconomic status. It is a world profoundly our world is profoundly religious, so that means something. Just on a personal note, I'm a Greek Orthodox myself, but I work for a Catholic organization, so that means something, right? We have a common cause to help those marginalized, to help the vulnerable, to help build back together, borrowing Joop's comment. So I guess you are very right to your points. I mean, I can pick one over another. So thank you for sharing that with us, and it is a blessing to have you with us here today. I would like now to move into introducing our third speaker, Sister Sheila Kinsey, the Executive Co-Secretary of the Justice, Peace and Integrity of Creation Commission in the Union of Superior Generals and International Union of Superior Generals. Sister Sheila, we're blessed that you are joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for this invitation to enter into conversation with you regarding the role of faith in the United Nations and with humanity as a whole. I've experienced working with you on such issues as HIV and AIDS, human rights, the environment, and West Papua. I have so much respect and gratitude for all that you are doing. As persons of faith, we have an imperative to speak from the depth of our spiritual perspective. We have spiritual principles which ground, support, and enrich the work of the United Nations. We share common objectives for a bright future for all persons with dignity, prosperity, and peace on a healthy planet. We need to be in solidarity with each other for the common good of all. United, we are strengthened to resist the strong forces that seek to destroy or minimize our efforts. As a Catholic, I have an opportunity to promote my actions from the basis of my faith and all the interconnections that are available. The Catholic Church's 1.2 billion members who are found in all areas affecting common world events: civil society, national governments, the international community, and the private sectors. The Holy See, as we just heard with our Archbishop Mensch being the former speaker, is a permanent non-member observer in the General Assembly, and its representative delivers statements in the name of the church leadership. We have men and women religious with the Economic and Social Council with consultative privileges, as well as work with other non-governmental organizations. Our church has the authentic voice of Pope Francis, who has spoken to the United Nations. His moral leadership is recognized worldwide in both ecumenical and interreligious circles and others of goodwill. He has hope in the work and the possibilities of the United Nations, even as he is clearly aware of the limitations. As a spiritual leader, he calls on the best of people. He continues to keep the UN present in our concerns. Most of the UN International Days are recognized with a prayerful intention and often with examples from local situations. For us, it shows the ways we can build upon the messages of our trusted church leaders. In his meeting with the UN General Assembly prior to their vote on the Sustainable Development Goals, he made a plea to the government leaders in the world, urging them to exercise a will which is effective, practical, and constant, concrete steps and immediate measures for preserving and improving the natural environment. He encouraged the leaders to put an end to social and economic exclusion and spoke of the need for an integral ecology, because a healthy environment, we have a healthy people. To do this, the state actors need our help. As Catholics, we have a clear organizational church structure, and the vowed religious are on the forefront, as you can see with our representation at the United Nations. By virtue of our congregational membership, our ministries are involved in all areas of civil society, governments, and international communities. As men and women religious around the world, and with all our connections, and with the UN representatives, we can leverage a strong voice, a strategic plan, orchestrated with common interests, and be powerful. My role in Rome allows me to be updated regularly on the Catholic social teaching, which is both challenging and energizing. Pope Francis continues building upon our rich heritage that can enhance the faith-based messages at the UN. Our work can be more central and practical if we promote and integrate 3 papal documents and other writings of Pope Francis as well. In Evangelii Gaudium, we are called to go out in mission and to share the joy of our faith, to change the world, and to care for our common home. He continued to develop this theme in Laudato Si, where spirituality entered the dialogue on the environment, as we are called to integrate our responses to environmental and social concerns. In Fratelli Tutti, he has called us to love our neighbors everywhere. He reminds us of the importance of giving our time for conversation in which we encounter one another in a deeper level and search ways to promote the best in one another. We need to find more equitable ways so that our common needs and our goods benefit everyone, not just the powerful. We must include the vulnerable, especially victims of trafficking, and the indigenous peoples. Due to my work as a coordinator of the Sowing Hope for the Planet, which promotes the involvement of religious men and women in actualizing Laudato Si, I was invited to be a member of the Vatican COVID-19 Commission, where we are charged with helping to create a framework for a new future. We follow a methodology called See, Judge, and Act in the assessment, discernment, and implementation of actions. Our work is based on reliable data and a realistic perception of the situation. Our assessment considers reflections from our faith tradition, considering the principles of Catholic social teaching and how it affects the dignity of the person, the common good, in that all benefit from the distribution of the resources. Being in solidarity, we are accountable for our responsible part in the establishment of a just and peaceful society. So our work is certainly in alignment with the SDGs. Catholic social teaching substantiates the human rights embedded within them. In church writings and as JPIC promoters, we follow this integrated format in a particular way. The COVID-19 Commission addresses the education about and care of our common home, water and nutrition, transitioning from fossil fuels to clean energy, and the economy. These are also your concerns, and we have worked with you in these areas. Taking inspiration from Fratelli Tutti on fraternity and social relationships, our dialogue needs to continue. As faith leaders, you are in conversation with many groups who come to the UN for important meetings. As faith leaders, you are in conversation with their efforts and what they are trying to do. Our JPIC efforts emanating from Rome and around the world could supplement your efforts, and we could benefit and contribute to your work at the United Nations. We come together with the goal of grounding insights, our community animating passion, and our unifying education and dedication to truth in service of human rights, in affirmation of the dignity and equal worth of every person, and in support of a sustainable relationship between humanity and the natural world. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Sheila. Your points, as always, are very inspiring and encouraging. I'll just stress the fact that you mentioned that we share common objectives and we work for common good. We care for our common home. I like that you use so much the word common. So that means, you know, the essence, that shows the essence of what you said. And only united, we can build a better world, a more just and peaceful society, right, which is actually the basis of the SDGs at the UN. Right. So all of us here really appreciate your points. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Moving into our next speaker, it is my distinct honor to introduce to you the Reverend Proto-Presbyter Dr. Nicholas Kazarian. He is the director of the Department of Inter-Orthodox, Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. We are remarkably blessed to have you here with us, Father Nicholas, today. The microphone is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Milaki, and I would like also to commend you and all the organizers of this webinar for this fantastic conversation. And I look forward for the Q&A and to listening to the other panelists this morning. So, Your Excellency, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by quoting His All Holiness Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, who in a very recent remarks to the G20 Interfaith Forum stated, "Human dignity does not have color, gender, age, ethnicity, or religion. Everyone has the same value and therefore respect for and equal treatment of human persons must be provided at every time and every place." It might seem a little paradoxical, but what faith-based organizations do the best in their advocacy work is not so much how they speak about God, but rather what they say about their fellow human beings. And I'm always inspired by the beautiful expression used by Pope Paul VI when he first addressed the United Nations in 1965, when he spoke about the church, and I would say in general religions, as expert in humanity. This is what, as religious leaders, we hope to be able to bring to the conversation. How can we support and promote some specific sustainable goals in line with the 2030 agenda? I would say by engaging the international community, multilateral organizations, through the transformative force of virtues understood as faith in action. So what virtues? The virtue of conversion in Christian spirituality, metania as we say, calls for an in-depth transformation. Love for one's neighbor, present and future and past, takes over selfishness. The collective action of believers will apply pressure on the world leaders and global decision makers. Sobriety will bring to the appetites of over-consumerism. Sharing limits to heal inequality. And finally, charity encompasses the political and the social sphere. Through prayer and commitment, we can be led to a new life that opens up the future to the possibility of a sustainable, just, and peaceful society. And in our department, we've tried to create spaces of compassion and openness where difficult conversations can take place through a new racial reconciliation page, for example, or another on anti-Semitism, in addition to creating opportunities for constituents to take action on issues of our advocacy, such as homelessness. These conversations aim to create a culture of understanding, to build bridges, to foster new friendships, to be able to respond to the challenges of today in solidarity and partnership with one another as human beings. So thinking virtues as a lever for social inclusion reveals another responsibility we should pursue. The challenge of religions in dialogue, for example, is to find the right balance between a metaphysical discourse that transcends the social framework. In Christian theology, we call believers as soul of the world, and simultaneously, the social activity of religions being more inclusive. In other words, we are called in our cooperation to reconcile the formal distinction between the sacred and the secular. Our function, our role, is to facilitate the representation of the other and to support the initiatives of the public authorities and the civil society. Religions share a savoir-faire, an expertise, especially in terms of mediation, that is useful for states in many contexts. We need to promote the skills we have been developing through the years to strengthen resilience and peace. As the Holy and Great Council of the Orthodox Church convened in June 2016 claimed in its encyclical, honest interfaith dialogue contributes to the development of mutual trust and to the promotion of peace and reconciliation. The Church strives to make the peace from on high more tangibly felt on earth. True peace is not achieved by force of arms, but only through love that does not seek its own. The oil of faith must be used to soothe and heal the wounds of others, not to rekindle new fires of hatred. End of quote. Finally, I would like to mention a virtue in action in favor of the protection of the environment. The challenge of peace is not just political, geopolitical, economic, or philosophical. We should recognize a spiritual dimension as well. Are we not misled by seeing ourselves as masters and possessors of nature, a nature that has the sole and only purpose to serve us? According to the scripture, we confess the world as God's creation in which thrives life and one can sense the divine. We therefore believe that we constitute an integral part of this good creation, recognize that these destinies of nature and humanity are intimately interrelated. In this regard, the biblical texts teach us that God has given us the faithful and prudent stewardship of creation. To protect humanity is to protect creation, and to protect creation is to protect humanity. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Father Nicolas, for sharing those rich and inspiring points. Excellent points, like always. You mentioned about human dignity, which doesn't have color, religion, race, or sex. I think everybody understands the common language here with what the Archbishop earlier said about faith, that doesn't have also limits, regardless of color, race, or sex or status. And I would like also to emphasize the point where you mentioned about our work in advocacy as a faith-based organizations, which is mainly how to speak on behalf of those in need. And we need to engage the international community through the Faith in Action, as you mentioned, which is a very, very to the point expression, while we're trying to get the virtues and to convert them into action. You talked about loving our neighbors. I think that everybody understood that this is the common language that we have. Like our previous speakers, they mentioned the same exact thing. So that's, for me, it's a hope for the future. You also emphasized the challenge of religious in dialogue, which is basically to find the right balance. And this is something that I personally believe that we have a future in. Again, we appreciate your valuable contribution to this discussion today. Very much appreciated. I would like now to move into our fifth speaker, Ms. Zafira Rameshwar. She's the representative to the UN for the Baha'i International Community. And we are extremely happy to have her with us today. Zafira, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and it's a joy to be here with all of you today. The 75th anniversary of the United Nations arrives as rapidly shifting global realities prompt a deeper appreciation of humanity's interconnection and interdependence. Amidst the disruption created and accelerated by a world-engulfing pandemic, numerous possibilities are opening for marked social change that can bring stability to the world and enrich the lives of its inhabitants. Throughout history, periods of turbulence have presented opportunities to redefine collective values and the assumptions that underlie them. Faith has shown itself to be key in this regard, whether faith in the efficacy of the development process, the capacity of the human race, the virtues of family, community, or a host of other ideals. The combination of conviction and aspiration has been central to generating motivation and action. Among these, religious faith has played a unique and vital role in development efforts. Religion has been a feature of human civilization since the dawn of recorded history and has prompted multitudes to arise and exert themselves for the well-being of others. Religion offers an understanding of human existence that lifts the eye from the rocky path to the distant horizon. And when true to the spirit of its transcendent founders, religion has been one of the most powerful forces for the creation of new and beneficial patterns of individual and community life. The link between commitment to any set of high-minded principles and service to the common good, however, is by no means automatic. When it comes to religion, for example, it is entirely possible to have a congregation of well-intentioned adherents whose actions do little to contribute to the betterment of society. So clearly there is much to learn about how noble ideals become expressed in committed, sustained action. For their part, religious communities might be understood as communities of practice, in which spiritual teachings are translated into social reality. But the process of capacity building that enables people of all backgrounds to participate in the transformation of society will be needed in numerous kinds of social spaces. The human family is one, and this is a truth that has been embraced by multitudes around the world. Its profound implications for our collective behavior must now give rise to a coordinated movement towards higher levels of social and political unity. To acknowledge the oneness of the human family is not to call for uniformity or to relinquish the wide range of established systems of governance. But a true appreciation for the oneness of humanity contains within it the essential concept of diversity. What is needed today is a settled consensus that, while preserving the various systems and cultures around the world, it embodies a set of common principles and values that can attract the support of every nation. A measure of agreement around these shared principles and norms can already be discerned in the ideals that inform global agendas, such as the universality of human rights, the imperative to eradicate poverty, or the need to live within environmentally sustainable limits. But there is further to go, and the challenging implications of such ideals must be reckoned with. When leaders consider the impact of policies before them, they will need to give thought to what so many might term the human spirit, the essential quality which seeks meaning and aspires to transcendence. These less tangible dimensions of human existence have typically been viewed as confined to the realm of personal belief and lying outside the concern of policymakers and administrators. But experience has shown that progress for all is not attainable if material advancement is divorced from spiritual and ethical advancement. For example, economic growth over recent decades has indisputably brought about prosperity for many, but with that growth unmoored from justice and equity, a few have disproportionately benefited from its fruits, and many are in precarious conditions. Those living in poverty are at the greatest risk from any contraction of the world economy, which exacerbates existing inequalities and intensifies suffering. Every effort to advance society, even if concerned with material conditions alone, rests on underlying moral assumptions. Every policy reflects convictions about human nature, the values that further various social ends, and the way that given rights and responsibilities inform one another. These assumptions determine the degree to which any decision will yield universal benefit. They must therefore be the object of careful and honest examination. Only by ensuring that material progress is consciously connected to spiritual and social progress can the promise of a better world be fulfilled. And I'd like to end with a quote which says, "Words must be supported by deeds, for deeds are the true tests of words." Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zafira. Thank you for sharing your rich comments and thoughts on our topic. Indeed, words must be translated into deeds. As you mentioned, the UN is celebrating the 75th anniversary within tremendous challenges and disruption in the world. However, numerous possibilities are opening to create a more stable society, a more healthy world by redefining our values. And religion has a powerful role, a powerful force to play, is a powerful force to play in this. I can, I can't isolate one point over the others. They were all very inspiring. You talked about oneness of our family and humanity, while at the same time you stressed the need of respecting diversity. So thank you for these comments. We are beyond grateful for that. Our next speaker is Ms. Rana Yurtsever. She represents the Islamic Society of Midwest as a member of their advisory board. Rana, we are extremely happy that you can join us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Despina. So as we celebrate the 75th year of the UN in such a difficult time, I'd like to start out by offering a short prayer from the first page of the Quran, the opening for the lost lives as a result of COVID-19. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the worlds, the most compassionate, the most merciful, master of the day of judgment. You alone we worship, and you alone we ask for help. Guide us to the straight path, the path of those you have blessed, not of those who have incurred your wrath, nor of those who have gone astray. Amen. So the quest for understanding and trust that underlies any dialogue is a process that requires equal and equally willing partners on both sides. Unfortunately, our world is in dire need of forums like this one, which facilitate genuine dialogue in a shrinking world. A dialogue that stems from the recognition of identities, that remains respectful and doesn't seek to inflame hostilities or dominate the other. A dialogue that it is itself based upon respect for religious plurality and cultural diversity. Dialogue is about understanding and learning about them. As the Quran states, God has created us into nations and tribes so that we may come to know one another. So engaging in constructive interfaith dialogue should continue to be one of UN's highest priorities, as it is a powerful tool in conflict prevention and resolution. Given what we're currently going through, I'd like to get a bit practical and focus on COVID-19. Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, states that cleanliness is half of faith, and he even gives specific guidance on what to do in times of epidemics and pandemics. Some things that he taught and offered us common sense solutions are actually being implemented today, such as like washing hands and nasal passages. The World Health Organization guides people to wash their hands at least 5 times a day, and their nasal passages for respiratory diseases, both of which actually come as part of the 5 times a day prayer ritual that we Muslims already perform on a daily basis through the ablution that we take to prepare for the prayer. And Prophet Muhammad also stated the following words in a hadith. He said, if you hear of a plague in land, do not enter it. And if it breaks out on the land where you stay, do not leave. And don't gather the healthy with the infected. These are the 2 fundamental pillars of public health measures in a pandemic, and they were actually put in place by the second Caliph Omar, peace be on him, during the plague of Amwas 14 centuries ago. So as the Islamic Society of Midwest in Chicago, we're based in Chicago, we made sure that we immediately took these measures at our center in Mount Prospect when the virus first broke out, and quarantine measures were ordered by our state. But beyond all of these material facts, I define this moment, this time, as a transformational moment in history that really led us to appreciate the very things that we as humanity took for granted. In terms of Muslims, I will speak for Muslims, it's been a very, very tough period, I have to admit, since community and large gatherings are very, very central to our religion. We're asked to pray in congregations whenever possible. The mandatory Friday prayers they have to be done in congregations. One of the pillars of Islam, pilgrimage to Mecca, is done in large millions of people, groups, and suddenly, all of these and even smaller scale Ramadan iftar dinners were canceled, right? It was quite an adjustment for all of us. I mean, not being able to gather for Ramadan dinners this year was, you know, it's unreal. We almost never eat Ramadan iftars by ourselves. So, and we were suddenly ordered to stay at home, right? But I think we as a community, I mean, apparently, you know, everything happens for a reason, and this virus had something to teach us. We as a community came out much stronger from it, and are continuing to grow stronger from it, and actually embracing and appreciating the very lessons I think that we should have originally been learning from these religious tenets that we so normally, you know, so casually just did and took for granted. Yes, we're not allowed to gather for Friday prayer, but we do so much more for our community now. As the Islamic Society of Midwest, we put aside a fund that came 100% from our own members' stimulus paychecks that were given by the United States government to help the rest of our members who lost their jobs as a result of COVID-19. The generosity of our members for their fellow friends actually gave us an opportunity to address the inequality that would have deepened as a result of COVID-19. And yes, we were unable to perform the annual pilgrimage, but seeing firsthand that this virus knows no skin color and wealth and attacks us all equally, really led us to embrace and understand the true reason behind millions of Muslims gathering and praying side by side around the Kaaba every year, you know, despite how much money they have in their bank accounts or the color of their skin. Like, we now know that we're all really equal, right, in the face of God. And, you know, in terms of the environment, you know, not sure how long it'll last, but we saw images from around the world regarding how much the earth was cleansed when there was less human destruction due to quarantine measures. You know, India is getting views of sites not visible in decades, right? The nitrogen dioxide pollution in the northeastern US is down by 30%. Coyotes have meandered along downtown Chicago's Michigan Avenue and near San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge. Goats took over a town in Wales, and stars just seem more visible at night. I mean, there's less human destruction. There's, you know, wildlife is coming back. It's getting cleaner, right? All our sort of what UN's missions are: cleaner air, no pollution. And lastly, we've been forced to learn to use technology more effectively since we can no longer host our weekly religious gatherings in person. And the plus side is we now have a much greater reach and a more excited crowd, thirsty for knowledge and gatherings, since we have been quarantined now for 8 months, right? A lot more gets done since we're able to just Zoom a meeting on the go and quickly organize an event over YouTube or Facebook Live where hundreds will show up. And like the first speaker mentioned, it's probably not as deep, but we're first learning to, you know, appreciate the very things that we took for granted, but also, you know, getting things done, like, you know, like the 21st century should be. Not sure when, but this pandemic will be over. And as we continue to mourn the lives that were lost, I hope we learn from this moment. I hope we are able to understand that humanity is one, and that this virus attacks everyone, regardless of religion, color, and race. And it teaches us this lesson that we must act as humanity, together as one, to tackle it. And I'd like to close off with this final thought. In Islam, God's two greatest names are the compassionate and the most merciful. And I think we all both Muslim and non-Muslim or no faith, are aware that these values and virtues, which are central to all the great faiths, these notions that of compassion and mercy, which allow us to reach out to others. And I think we have to hang on to this. It's in the midst of all of this uncertainty, all the potential violence in this situation and the potential change leading to all kinds of dramatic violence, we do have at the heart of humanity the notions of compassion and mercy. And that's what we all, like all of us, have to run to and propagate and spread so that we don't lose what are, I think, the single most essential features of ourselves as human beings, and that is compassion and mercy. Thank you, and I'm sorry.
Thank you, Rana. You don't need to apologize. Your points were so touching, and apparently it's obvious that affected so many of us here. And thank you for your input, though, and for sharing your perspective in our discussion. I'm happy that you mentioned about interfaith dialogue, that it is a process that requires equal partners, and that we need to respect our cultural diversity and our different faith backgrounds, and while understanding and learning about one another. You also mentioned about COVID-19, this pandemic that challenges all of us every day. Yes, it is a transformational moment, and it's something that we took for granted, but we need to redefine and reconsider things. We need to start appreciating things, and this pandemic needs to teach us something, I guess. And taking this point to the UN level, yes, we will come out much stronger from this. We can build back together, and the faith-based organizations can very actively involve and contribute to this process. Now I would like to again thank you, Rana, for your points, very much appreciated. I would like now to move into introducing our next speaker, Ms. Teresa Blumenstein, the New York coordinator for the Justice Coalition of Religions. Teresa is one of the lead organizers that drafted and launched the statement titled Faith-Based Vision for the UN at 75 and beyond. Teresa, we are very happy to have you here, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Despina, and it's great to be here with everyone and among so much profound leadership coming from so many long-standing traditions and rich backgrounds. This is exactly the kind of exchange that the United Nations is about, and it's what will ultimately advance the global conversation toward the vision and the world that we need. And I want to begin my remarks today by seizing on the idea of partnerships and common cause, which are two themes that have been arising again and again. For nearly 30 years, the NGOs that represent Catholic congregations of sisters, brothers, and priests have been meeting informally on a monthly basis in the form of a fellowship group, which we call RUN, which in the UN style of acronym-based jargon stands for Religious at the UN. And when this group meets, we share important updates and announcements about our individual organizations' ongoing projects, and we alert one another to upcoming opportunities at the UN for advocacy or education. But the central component of these gatherings is really that it's a time for prayer and spiritual fellowship. And this kind of spiritual exchange is really a time in which we can share the joy and the weight of what it means to approach UN-based advocacy as a ministry, not simply as work. And though all of us in the group are representing a community that identifies as Catholic, each of us really brings a unique perspective and a lifetime of unique experience that informs how we can sustain our passion and, importantly, our hope for a just and peaceful world. And over the course of the last several months, members of this group came together to engage in a process of reflection on the world vision that was laid forth by the UN Charter in 1945, about what is needed in this pivotal moment to sustain worldwide faith in that vision, and what the long histories and collective wisdom of our faith-based institutions could possibly contribute to ensure that that vision is maintained into the era that lies before us. And while this reflection yielded a great number of very specific and detailed ideas and recommendations for the UN system and its member states, we kind of distilled the very many ideas into 4 overarching recommendations. The first of those was that we should make the role of civil society, including faith-based organizations, in UN processes more central and meaningful. Something that I imagine would have great support from those on this call today. The second point was that we need reform of the Security Council's structure and its scope of work that would reflect a modern and community-focused, as opposed to isolation-focused understanding of security, and also that it would reflect the UN's longstanding championship of democracy, as the Security Council is one of the least democratic functioning organs of the UN system. The third overarching recommendation was for the development of a UN body that would be dedicated to the coordination of both the internal and national level reviews of implementation of all the various UN treaties, declarations, resolutions, etc., all of those frameworks. And by internal, in that case, we were referring to ensuring essentially that the UN system itself and the way that it functions really is an action of all of the documents that it upholds, that it is walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And the fourth key recommendation from our reflection process was that we scale up technology capacity, affordability, and accessibility, and revise the logistical approach used in UN processes in order to allow for more remote participation to become actually a long-standing primary mode of operation for the UN, because we see that as a pathway that could actually allow for a lot stronger grassroots participation, even from some of the remote areas in which many of our communities are living and working. And this statement outlines very specific steps that could be undertaken to achieve each of these 4 recommendations that I've mentioned. And it will be widely circulated to UN member states and agencies later this week. As of right now, it's been co-signed by over 100 faith-based organizations from various faith traditions. And while we certainly don't have time to dig into all of those specific details and strategies under each recommendation right now, I am going to right now share a link in the chat box. So anyone who's interested can access the statement. Was available in English, Spanish, and French. And I also included a link there if you wish to endorse that statement on behalf of your own organization. Just follow that last link there in the chat box. But while I still have the floor for another minute, I do want to add that while this statement outlines a lot of requests that we, as the faith-based organization community, have put forth to the UN system to create pathways for us to have a central and impactful role, it also seems a good moment for us to recommit to our own part in making that vision a reality. We need to be ready to organize and prepare our faith communities, not only in NGO offices that are based in New York City or Geneva, but in every community in which we are present. We need to be ready to seize every pathway that is opened to us, both now and in the future. And there are several important ways which we can begin doing that work even now, regardless of how well these recommendations are received by the UN system. We can always be informing our sisters and brothers about the ways in which the SDGs, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and other UN frameworks are aligning with our spiritual teachings. We can ensure that they have vocabulary to speak about their values and ministries in a way that really integrates well and meaningfully and constructively into the UN dialogue. We can convene our members on the local and national level to ensure that those who are in remote and marginalized communities understand their own rights, first of all, and are aware of national UN offices, and right now, so many online opportunities to engage with the UN system. And we can help our brothers and sisters to be in a position to articulate to governments what is needed to overcome the barriers that they're facing to the realization of their own rights. In essence, we need to not only ask the leaders of the UN system to recognize the real meaning of the Charter's opening phrase, "We the peoples," but we need to activate all of the wide, brilliant brain and soul power of our already vast and trusted networks to ensure that peoples of all faiths and all nations are ready and willing to claim ownership and leadership of this great multilateral experiment that we refer to as the United Nations. And there can be no doubt about it, everything that we're envisioning for the United Nations in the era ahead requires essential acts of faith. It requires maintenance of a vision for long-term systemic transformation. It will require radical commitment to collaboration. It will require trust in one another's commitment to the common good. It will require an ongoing posture of openness to authentic exchange. And these are not tasks that can be accomplished once and for all. They're going to be daily practices that require constant investment on all our parts. But they are indeed acts of faith. And this is a moment and a challenge that surely calls for great faith. So I'm so grateful to be here in conversation with so many faith leaders as we continue to strategize and find new ways to act together to answer that call. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Teresa, for your informative presentation and such great detail. You mentioned so many important things. You pointed out the importance of spiritual exchange, of what it means and how it means to approach UN advocacy as a mission rather than as a work. We all can see the common language here with the previous speakers about seeing the UN advocacy in terms of the human as a central point, as a focus of our work rather than as a work per se, as a job per se. And I like the point that you stressed about people of all faiths need to claim ownership of the UN. And that's a very important step in order to have a better UN and to build a better and a more stable world. That's for sure. I know that I understand that you didn't have time to analyze more on the 4 overarching points, recommendations within the statement, the written statement. But I'm pretty sure that everyone can access your link at the chat box, and they can dig in more in the statement and the points that very well it raises very well. Thank you again, Teresa. Before moving into hearing our last panelist, I would like again to remind everyone that after that, we will open the floor to discussion. So please start thinking about your questions. I have already received 2, I think. And have your questions ready to share them with us in the chat box. A kind request, please keep your questions short if possible. And also, if possible, indicate the speaker that your question is being addressed to. Of course, if you have a general question of more general nature, then the whole panel will respond to that. With that being said, I would like to introduce our final speaker, Ms. Marvelous Misolas. She is the NGO representative at the UN for the Maryknoll Sisters of Saint Dominic. And she's also one of the lead organizers of the team that put together a video clip with key messages from representatives of a number of Catholic organizations accredited to the UN. Marvi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Despina. So good morning to all our panelists and participants again. So this morning, I am tasked to launch our Faith Speaks to UN75 video. So some of us who are members of the network Religious at the United Nations have contributed to this video production. The video articulates our hopes and dreams for the United Nations as she continues on to the next 75 years and beyond. We are Catholic religious NGOs who are accredited to the Economic and Social Affairs Council. Our work with the people inform our advocacy here at the UN. Our institutions and organizational work have contributed to the long-term global, social, economic, and peace development. May these videos speak to us, faith-based organizations, as we continued our partnership and collaboration with the UN, and of course, to all of us. So without much further ado, I will now play the video for all of us.
Congregation of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace calls upon the UN75 to build a more just world through immediate demilitarization, particularly from nuclear weapons, and redistribution of those funds toward drastic and equitable climate change solutions.
The International Representation Association advocates for global justice. In this regard, we call on the UN to be the voice of the voiceless, of those furthest behind, especially of women and children that experience all forms of violence.
We Maryknoll Sisters pray for a United Nations that is inclusive of the voices of all peoples of the world as we journey together towards a more peace-filled world. Happy 75th anniversary.
At Unanima International, we would like to see a UN that focuses on individuals and families left furthest behind, specifically women and children with a lived experience of homelessness and displacement.
Fondazione Proclade International calls upon United Nations to ensure global peace, protection of persons and planet, and promote equitable economic growth and sustainable development.
Hi. The Company of the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul wish the United Nations a happy 75th. How can we make a better world as the UN turns 75? First, let's remember the common good and work together in a multilateral way. Then let's end homelessness so everyone has a place where they can say they belong.
On this 75th anniversary of the United Nations, we ask you to strengthen your multilateralism work, decrease nuclear proliferation, and set aside a seat for the Secretariat for Civil Society.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marvi. Thank you for your hard work on compiling this video. It definitely was an excellent way of relaying a strong message using technology. With that, I now open the floor to discussion. I want to raise a question from Brian O'Toole. He points that we need to, those in power actually need to learn from those with no power, and they need to understand and talk with those furthest behind. And actually, they are asking them to come out from their comfort zone and join those people that have no comfort zone at all. And his question is, how can we do this? So is anyone from the panel wish to start? You? Do you mind if I ask you first? Would you like to answer this one?
Yes. I'm trying. It's not an easy question, to be honest. You know, what we do is we facilitate this process, not necessarily we as staff are in a position to empower, but we can and are working, can work and are working with all of you to show opportunities where you can participate and make a difference. And despite the pandemic, there are still quite a few. There's still many. And I know that many of you are regulars at the UN, so to speak, and know very well what is going on. And that is important because it takes a little bit of effort to understand how the UN works. And I know that, well, you're all in good company. Espoina, you're one of those, if I can say that. And obviously, the permanent observer of the Holy See is another very well-informed participant. So look for opportunities and take them. That's basically, in a nutshell, what I would answer to this question. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm happy to hear your response to that. You are always so kind and willing to accept the civil society into dialogue and further engagement. Archbishop Kacha, would you like to share your thoughts on this question? I can. Can you hear us, Your Excellency?
Yes, I can hear.
Would you like to comment on this question? How we can make those in power sit on the same table with those furthest behind and learn from their experiences on the ground in order to make them, you know, stay out of their comfort zone and actually join the most marginalized ones.
Yes, I think that it's an interesting interaction, because United Nations means that not each person has to do everything, but everything each person does can be put together for the good of everyone. So the best way is to first to know what people on the ground are doing, and sometimes also to take much more communication between UN agencies, not just headquarters, but agencies on the ground that work with so many of NGOs and faith-based organizations on the ground. I feel that the main communication should happen at the grassroots level where people really meet doing something. And from that work comes also a little bit at the headquarters where decision makers sit, but knowing what's going on the field, that should be very important. And sometimes the presence of the NGOs help also people who has institutional responsibilities to know other ways of doing things. For instance, institutions are very much concerned with budget, money, and this, and technical issues, which are fundamental. But you don't build a sense of community out of money. You need a spirituality. You need a common sense of shared dignity, and then money will help. And sometimes we have to bring this spiritual and human, as the father said, the faith-based and people of faith are expert in humanity. That help also to find the right path. And I think this is the best way, especially on the ground, to try to have this contact, not just at the headquarters.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your response. Yes, it's exactly what Father Nicolas mentioned before about human dignity. And Father Nicolas, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Despina, Your Excellency. Thank you also for the excellent panelists today. I want to say, to answer the question, really, that when we think about the role and vocation of faith-based organizations within an organization as big as the UN, it's really about the circulation of information. As religious leaders, we have specific visions for a world, from where it comes from and where it goes. And the work of religious leaders is connected to their spirituality, as it was said before. If we are people of prayer, we have people of the words, and words matter. And everything that is done at the UN presently and in the past is also connected to the use and ministering of languages that will then ultimately translate themselves on the ground and on the grassroots level. So what I want to say is that religious leaders are here to facilitate the communication and the dialogue among all the partners. Thank you.
That's a very good point, Father Nicolas. Thank you about that. Sister Sheila, you have something to add on it?
Yes, I had worked with the UN in the mining area. So the mining working group in particular, starting in 2012 with the survey. And at this time, the Pontifical Council of Justice and Peace was also involved in that survey. And many of the representatives at the UN filled out that document, which then led to a number of interviews with that process. We had a meeting with the CEOs. They had asked for that initially. We also had another meeting with the those affected by mining. And then we had a follow-up with the CEOs with that, again, being careful with how we share information. But then recently we had one with those affected by mining, those in leadership in mining, and the NGOs connected with mining. And you have to know that many of our JPIC people are the representative link with congregations with the UN. And recently we worked with the mining group, came out with the document, the SDG 6 on water. And then our representatives here worked on the spirituality, the reflections on water. And so we had a person working with the indigenous people giving a comment, giving an article. We had a meeting, JPIC and mining, with different groups, and then we were able to give information to the Synod on the Amazon and had some sessions on mining. So again, the information back and forth with the UN, with those affected on different levels, with the church context, but also with the understanding of, you know, the whole humanity condition. And we hope with this new Laudato Si anniversary year and the 2020 plan, that when we integrate the message of the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, the economy, spirituality, the education and networking with one another, with the model of nonviolence and peace building, we can begin to make a difference. So we're trying to work with all the elements that you just mentioned are necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Sheila. Thank you so much. Rana or Teresa Morby, who would you like first to give us your perspective on the question of our friend Brian?
Yeah, so I mean, I could.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I would say, you know, trying to be as present as possible for those who don't have voice and who don't have that comfort zone, like he was mentioning. Looking at Chicago, we do have a lot of underserved areas where, you know, people don't have voices. So some of the things that we try at a grassroots level is to have open mic conversations. People, you know, geared toward different groups. Like, you know, we could have one for the homeless, where they could come and because people want to be able to relate, right? They don't want to come to a meeting where there's the president, like because he's not relatable, or where there's a congressman, because they won't feel comfortable. But if there's another homeless person sitting at that table, then they'll be there, because then there's somebody that they can relate to. And I think as faith leaders, it is our job to create those kinds of platforms where people of the same less privileged categories can come together. That's really all I have to say. Like, creating those rooms and platforms where people can come together, but on a relatable level, not like you know, the head of the UN listening, like, okay, I'm listening, but what he can't even understand where I'm coming from, right? So kind of like that. But I think it is our job as faith leaders to be able to go to those environments, because I was just reading in the chat, somebody said that until one of the Muslim leaders was in Africa, I think, some of the Muslim leaders were using alcohol-based hand sanitizer that people wouldn't, right? So because everybody else to them is unrelatable, but if you see somebody doing it and that person is relatable, then you'll begin to do it as well. And that's how you'll begin to tackle grassroots issues, which are really, like, if we could solve our grassroots issues, then we wouldn't have world problems. I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Rana. Zafria, did you share this opinion? What's your thought on the question?
Yeah, I think this question is a really good one, because it really cuts to the heart of a lot of the conversation about inclusivity and universal participation at the United Nations. And I think something that we need to come to realize is kind of shifting our understanding of leadership and decision-making to really being one of service and servitude. It's very easy to ride the wave of privilege, and it's very hard for those who are benefiting from these current systems to want to give up or make space for others. But I think we are becoming much more cognizant of that, you know, the suffering of some is really at the disadvantage of all of us, that humanity will only flourish when the full capacities of everybody is contributed, that their wisdom, their knowledge, their insights are integrated into what we do. So I think this creation of a culture of leadership where sacrifice for the common good comes to the fore, that there's a discipline in the decisions that we're making, that there's a discipline in really consulting and gathering information, but that also within that culture of kind of a service-oriented leadership, that we are acting together, that it's not so much coming together and listening in certain spaces, but then not actually acting on the knowledge and the ideas that are shared. So I think, yeah, some of these orientations towards the way we are structuring things, the way that we are organizing ourselves, and then also the way that we act need to be very disciplined in this regard.
Thank you, Zafira. Thank you for that. Teresa, would you like to add anything? Are you there, Teresa?
Sorry, I wasn't unmuting. Well, I think the two wise women who spoke before me have offered some really excellent and concrete examples of how we can recognize, one, that, you know, power is not only in the hands of governments. We actually hold some of it ourselves just because we have any kind of seat in a UN conversation. And that's something that we can always be looking for new, more creative, more accessible pathways to bring the most marginalized among us into that conversation, because we are not the most marginalized. That's the first thing we need to recognize. But then a second practical thought is to think about, when it comes to trying to increase receptivity on the parts of those with the most power, to extend a sort of a pastoral care and a pastoral outreach approach in a way that faith leaders are so expert in doing already. And it's usually applied in a different setting where perhaps, you know, the person who is the faith leader is the person that really holds the most power in those settings usually. But the pastoral outreach can certainly extend in other spaces. And it's not a matter of evangelization, especially in a secular space, in a political space like the United Nations, but it is a matter of expression of care, an expression of community building, bringing everyone into a conversation and trying to lift up what are the common goals and the common good among us, and looking to really transform minds and hearts, which is something faith leaders, that is the bread and butter of the faith leadership business, is transforming minds and hearts and building consensus for action and transformation. And so if we can kind of apply that same approach to political and diplomatic spaces, it's not lost, it's not ineffective in those spaces simply because we are not in a worship space. And the other point that I would add is simply, again, returning to this idea of language. If we can give the tools of UN language to those who are sitting in positions of marginalization, it'll kind of perk up the ears of those who are sitting in the UN conversations in a seat of power, and kind of bridge this gap to understand that the experiences on both sides can meet via this common language.
Thank you, Teresa. Marvia, I see you nodding.
Sure.
Do you share his opinion?
Yeah, I would like to contribute to this question, and thank you, Brian, for bringing this very important question. I think what comes to me with your question is deep listening. You know, how we who are at the level of UN in terms of advocacy will listen to the people in the grassroots. I remember coming in 2018 that I kind of see that the need for bringing the voices from the grassroots, let them speak to us, and let the people speak to the leaders of the nations who are discussing at the UN. And I think we have to do our work to do this. We need to do our research. And I think I would like to give an example of what we did at the High-Level Political Forum in July to tackle the issue of sexual abuse of children online. What we did is to give an example, to call on the people who are working. You know, especially we had a guest from Microsoft, and spoke to us and listened to the reality, what was happening, in in the Philippines, especially in terms of this issue. So that bridging of the deep experience from the grounds and people who are sitting on the power, who have the power to, to make policies, we need to connect. And I think this has been, mentioned by all the speakers, to connect. We are bridges, I think, to make good policies that have impact, that have good impact for the common good. Thank you.
Thank you, Marvi. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, time does not allow us to accept but only one last burning question. I think this one is more specific. Maybe, Teresa, you could address it. We talked about major group for faith-based organizations and how we can create such a group. I know that that's the part of the written statement. So would you like to answer this one? Your thoughts about this, how we can realize that suggestion?
Yes. So this was, as Despina mentioned, one of the more detailed requests that we made in the faith-based vision statement when it came to trying to create space for civil society and faith-based organizations in general. And actually, when we were preparing to launch the statement, we had a conversation with Joep, who spoke first today. And he was suggesting that this be an action that we proceed toward and do some advocacy around in the rather immediate term. Because now is the time, as we'll have another HLPF approaching, and it may well also be a remote affair, as the other UN commissions are this year. And so really in the next few months, he was telling us, would be the time to get our voices together to submit a formal request for a standing major group place within the UN system, because that, according to particularly the modalities of the high-level political forum, which for sustainable development, which is the review forum for the SDGs, kind of those standing established major groups are kind of the designated seats and speaking opportunities for that forum. And so for anyone on this call or beyond who is interested in participating in submitting a formal request, I would certainly be happy to work together with anyone who's interested to reach out, probably through Joep actually, and UNDESA to help advance that effort.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you so much. I know we're way out of our time. It's time to wrap up. So now we heard today so many convergent viewpoints and enriching common language, if I may say, regarding pathways to make the constructive role of faith-based organizations in the UN processes more central and impactful. In the context, of course, of the UN75 discussion on the future of the UN. Everybody acknowledged that the faith-based organizations actively engage in projects on the ground that further the objectives of the UN Charter and the Sustainable Development Goals. As we forge ahead to build back together, this sounds a little bit weird, forge ahead to build back together. We need to continue working together through partnerships and strengthen collaboration among faith-based organizations and the UN, national governments, and many other actors in the international community, civil society, of course, in general as well. Definitely, there are many opportunities for building new or leverage old partnerships. Many of these points were mentioned from our speakers. Partnerships among the FBOs, the faith-based organizations, and the UN. Surely, we must ensure that the FBOs are not only present, but they have a meaningful engagement in the UN processes. For me, I think that we need to always keep one important element in mind. It is faith that brought us today, right? So regardless your own faith, tradition or background, it is faith that unites us. It doesn't divide us. We all share a common objective, a future of dignity, prosperity and peace on a healthy planet. So this is true regardless of what religion or belief one practices. And I suppose this is what gives us hope for the future, for tomorrow. That being said, I would like to thank you all so much for participating in this conversation, especially in these challenging times. Special thank you to each one of our speakers. It has been an honor to have you all with us today. We're extremely grateful for your comments and input that you all shared with us. It has been a very rich and informative, of course, discussion. Thank you for your time, and have a good morning or evening, night, depending on where you are connecting from. Thanks. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Despina.
Thank you. Bye-bye. See you hopefully in New York. Live.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank
See
you.
you in the building.
Everyone.
Thank you, Safira,
Thank
for
you.
being in
Very
this
much,
space.
Christina and everyone.
Bye-bye.
Excellent, Jasponina. Thank you, Marvi,
Thank you,
Teresa.
Well done.
Archbishop, and
Thank
thank you,
you,
Father
Rohan.
Marshall.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you,
Thank you,
Teresa.
Sheila.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye. Bye. And thank you really so much. Wonderful sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.